how have these certifications with WSET, with VIA, helped you when it comes to those conversations you might be having with producers, importers, and distributors?
Yeah, I mean, having these certifications sort of force you to dive a little bit deeper and expand your range. So it really comes down to communication and sort of a mutual trust. When you have the same vocab and you've studied the same maps and you're on the same page, it sort of makes things really efficient, right?
Right.
So, especially when we're doing things like tasting, I'm able to evaluate independently typicity and value and quality regardless of what the sales pitch might be.
Okay.
So I find that's really important, but I think above all, it's more so about like the communication.
Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, your host, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the US market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests in every episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned from the episode. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us this week to learn more about the US market. Hello, welcome back to Masterclass US Wine Market on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today we're talking about a very interesting topic around education and why formal wine certifications, including the Italian Wine Ambassador, matter, especially for young sommeliers who are carving out their careers in the US wine world. To explore this topic, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jack Liggett, a New York City-based sommelier currently working in one of Manhattan's vibrant wine scenes and deeply engaged in advanced wine study. Jack recently completed the WSET diploma and the Italian wine expert certification. And in fact, he's actually the youngest Italian wine expert ever. Congratulations, Jack. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And you're currently pursuing your MW, your Master of Wine, this spring.
Hopefully, the entrance exams are this spring, so we'll see. I
Okay,
haven't gotten them
fingers
yet.
crossed. Super ambitious. So, Jack, tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you're sitting today. I know you're getting ready for Friday night service, so thank you for squeezing this interview in before that. But tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit about how you entered the world of wine.
So my journey actually started a long time ago when we were growing up. My grandfather, he's Calabrian, and he took his winemaking tradition to the States. He lived in Groton, Massachusetts, and he had, I think, 13 or 14 rows in his backyard. So when we were growing up, as early as I can remember, we would go as a family and friends, and we called it grape picking. So we would all get together, we would pick grapes, and then we would watch the adults make wine.
Amazing.
So that really became a formative tradition of our family until I was about like 12 or 13, and then he moved down to Florida. So that's when that tradition kind of ended.
As many good New Yorkers do, as we know. Same thing with my grandparents. They had the same trajectory.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So after, I forgot about wine for like 9 years after we stopped doing that. And then when I was studying abroad in Rome, my junior year of college, I took an elective about Italian wine and culture, which was really interesting. And I remember my professor was telling us that a number of her students, after returning back to the States, had come back to Italy and worked a harvest. And I sort of thought about that when I came back to finish school senior year.
Amazing. So some family early experience that was then, reignited through a study abroad. I feel like study abroad can be so formative. So that's a really cool story. I love how it all kind of came back around and connected. So to our listeners, our three key takeaways for this episode today with Jack are: number one, why structured wine education matters beyond tasting and service. Number two, the real impact of wine certifications for sommeliers in the wine trade today. And finally, how studying Italian wine can open doors in the trade and in hospitality. So, Jack, as I mentioned earlier, you recently completed the WSET diploma and Italian wine expert certification. For listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain what these certifications involve and how they differ from one another? And also incorporate how the Master of Wine program will differ from the two certifications that you currently hold.
Yeah, definitely. So WSET is sort of like the foundation where you start at. There's
Okay.
4 levels, the first one being the most basic, and you sort of go over introductory things like what is a grape, what are the components, and then it sort of progresses from there. So there's level 1, level 2, and level 3, and then level 4 is really when it becomes more difficult. So that last level is broken up into 6 subunits: viticulture and winemaking. You've got wine business, you've got wines of the world, which is the by far the biggest section, followed by sparkling wines, fortified wines, and then there's also a research paper. So WSET sort of encompasses a little bit of everything and sort of makes you study almost every wine region in the world. And it takes about 2 years to complete that last level. I think altogether, including when I started doing WSET level 2, it probably took me like 3.5 years to do
Wow.
everything.
Yeah, I went up to level 3 and then the diploma was like, oh man, this is like a full-time job. It really is a ton of work and studying.
Yeah, it is.
And do you find yourself like, you're a young sommelier. I mean, how do you find your peers? Are many of them studying for these same certifications? Are you finding yourself unique? Like, I'm just curious today, 2026, how people that are at your stage in their career are approaching wine education.
I would say that a lot of my peers that are working in restaurants oftentimes gear towards the Court of Master Sommeliers, which
Right.
makes sense because it's a little bit more restaurant focused. I do know a couple of people as well that, that don't work specifically in restaurants, but are in the industry, and they usually start with WSET. So those are like the two main ways that you can go about it.
Okay. And why did you choose WSET over the court?
I chose WSET because when I first started studying for WSET, I was working as a cellar hand during a harvest on Long Island. And so I knew I wanted to be in restaurants for a while, but I didn't anticipate restaurants being as important as it has been in my career.
Okay, so you didn't originally think you were going to go into restaurants. And now tell us about where you're sitting in one of New York City's finest dining establishments. Tell us a little bit about where you work and how you found yourself there.
Yeah, so when I was working that cellar hand position and I started with WSET, I found myself wanting to, be more involved with the wines that I was learning about. And when you're a cellar hand, it's really more manual labor and you don't really have access to what you're reading.
Right.
So, being so close to New York City, I knew that being in restaurants would be a really great classroom for me. So, with no restaurant experience, it is tough to get a decent job in the New York dining scene. So, I sent a couple of cold emails and I ended up getting the job at the restaurant that I work at now called 53. And I started as, part of the opening team. I was a busser. And then after that, I became the wine runner, which is essentially an assistant som that sort of handles day-to-day tasks, just helping the soms on the floor. I finished my WSET level 3, became a floor som full time. And then about 3 years later, now I'm managing the program.
That's amazing. What a trajectory. So you really started from the ground up at 53, but have grown to be running the entire program, which is incredible. And how is the studying that you're doing, both the diploma with Vinitaly International Academy, how has it changed the way you approach wine at the restaurant?
I mean, it changes everything. It's, when you start out before you study, I knew what most people know, what they kind of like to drink. So for me, it was Chianti Classico, but I wasn't really thinking structurally about like why I liked it. And so when you start studying, you sort of understand those frameworks and more practically speaking now. When I'm speaking with guests and they tell me things about what they like and they might not know, and they say things like fresh or smooth, I sort of have to quickly translate that into a specific region or grape or style. And
Right.
so studying kind of makes that connection faster and more confident.
Okay, got it. So you're kind of now able with the studying and the structure you've learned through the different programs to really quickly translate what a consumer wants to a wine that they might actually enjoy. That makes a
Yeah,
ton of sense. What are some of the more common descriptors you're given from your diners?
it really depends. I mean, some people really know what they like, and maybe they're really into Burgundy and they haven't seen this producer. So then I'll tell them about this producer they might not know, and then other people don't know anything at all, and they're like, "I think I like something sweet." So it depends on that consumer and the guest.
Right, absolutely. We're on the Italian wine podcast. So what would you say right now for Italian wine you're finding to be especially popular among your diners, or where are you pointing drinkers in the direction within the world of Italian wine?
I mean, we have our classics, right? Like most people know Barolo and Brunello and Chianti. So, the list definitely has those and a number of options for them. But we're also seeing sort of a resurgence in these indigenous Italian grape varieties. So, right now we're pouring Pecorino from Tiberio by the glass, which is a really great wine and it's inexpensive and it's delicious. So,
Yeah.
there's definitely different pathways to introduce people into these new grape varieties that they're not familiar with.
Right. And you mentioned price point, right? And when something is a little more accessible and fresh, that, especially from the price point perspective, people might be more willing to explore it, which
Yeah,
is exciting.
definitely.
Yeah. Amazing. So, Jack, talk to us a little bit more from practical sense. You're running a ambitious beverage program. Restaurant hours are long. How do you fit studying into your schedule?
Honestly, it's easier than you think when you have a SOM schedule because not only are we sort of studying wine in our free time, we also get to come to work and we get to taste wine as our job.
Right.
So it's really important when you're learning the subject to like kind of have that opportunity to taste. So it's a little bit easier for us. And I will say that when you're working in restaurants, you sort of have these weird days off during the week. So
Hmm.
if you have off, Tuesday, everyone else is working. So there's no FOMO on a Tuesday afternoon. So you're comfortable spending that time studying.
Right. You've got free time when no one else does. So
Yeah.
that's true. And I like what you said earlier in our conversation just about restaurants being this practical classroom in a way for really getting to taste every day you're at work and explore and talk,
Yeah.
and decipher wine. I think that's so true. That's so right. It's just like a great way. I mean, otherwise, if you're a consumer, you have to go out and buy all these wines to taste all of them, right? It adds up pretty quickly. So
Yeah,
that makes
definitely.
tons of sense. Let's talk a little bit, about the different paths that sommeliers are taking as far as certifications. What would you say to a younger wine professional or one of your peer that doesn't think they need traditional wine education anymore because of the way things are evolving, or just, they
Mhm.
feel like they don't want to invest the time or the resource? What might you say to one of your colleagues?
I mean, I think it really depends on your long-term goals and what you're looking to do. If you've been
Okay.
working the floor for a number of years and you're happy where you're at, you probably don't need to dig really deep into advanced study if you don't see yourself doing it. I think that if wine is your career, though, like especially in this competitive market that is New York, deeper study really does give you some more range. For example, if you're working in an Italian restaurant and the list is very Italian and you know it, that's great, and that might be all you need. But when you're doing something like the WSET, you're sort of forced to learn these other regions that you might not
Right.
be as interested in. And I think that that can be helpful later on in your career if you do want to transition out of restaurants. But, at the same time, it's like these classes are expensive. And so there are barriers to entry. And so it definitely isn't for everybody, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a decision to make just in your own, like you said, your own career trajectory and, your own career investment. How did you find the Vinitaly International Academy program? How did you come to find that?
It was really cool. So when I was studying abroad in Rome and I took that class about Italian wine and culture, my professor, Cynthia Chaplin, she wasn't working for Vinitaly at the time, but we stayed in contact after I graduated and she introduced me to the course. And so
Amazing.
I applied. It was a great experience. So I did the class in Verona. Everything was so organized. It's stressful because you
It's
have
a
this
lot of
textbook and
information.
you have these videos to study and you don't feel like you have enough time. So it's
Never.
yeah, never exactly. So I mean, it was an awesome experience. Definitely stressful.
Yeah.
In those 3 months, I learned more about Italian wine than I would have in any other scenario. So
Right. It's really a true crash course in the category, which is amazing. So, Jack, when you're working as a beverage director, you're in front of distributors, importers, producers, probably pretty frequently, I'd imagine, especially in New York City, where so many producers are coming to present their wines. How have these certifications with WSET, with VIA, helped you when it comes to those conversations you might be having with producers, importers, and distributors?
yeah, I mean, having these certifications sort of force you to dive a little bit deeper and expand your range. So it really comes down to communication and sort of a mutual trust. When you have the same vocab and you've studied the same maps and you're on the same page, it sort of makes things really efficient, right?
Right.
So, especially when we're doing things like tasting, I'm able to evaluate independently typicity in value and quality regardless of what the sales pitch might be.
Okay.
So I find that's really important. But I think above all, it's more so about like the communication.
Yeah, and being on the same page, that makes a ton of sense. Kind of you're starting with the same language and the same tools in your toolbox to really understand everything that's being presented to you. And as you said, form your own evaluation of the wine and what is being presented to you.
Yeah,
Yeah, which makes a ton of sense. Thinking about the same topic of meeting with importers, meeting with producers, a lot of our listeners either work for importers, distributors, or producers themselves. What are some things that you really appreciate about an importer, distributor, or a producer presenting their wines to you? Like, what really, from a structural standpoint, like organizational, helps you understand their product well when they come and present wines to you?
yeah. I think especially when a distributor comes in with their producer, and I'm able to talk to them directly, that always makes the experience so much better because I'm able to put, a face to a name. And, every day you're looking at, hundreds of wine labels, but you don't
Right.
always get to know the story behind them, right? Like you might know the wine quality is good, but it's so much cooler when you get to meet these producers face to face and, you get to hear it from them. And I think that is really valuable. So whenever I have a producer visit, I try to get as much of my staff and coworkers together so we can sort of experience that together.
Yeah, and that's something we talk about a lot on this show is the importance of being in the market. And I think we're hearing it straight from you from the source of how impactful it is when the supplier themselves is coming to present their wines. And
For
of course,
sure.
they can't always be in the market, travel's expensive, et cetera. Or we might have, 17 snowstorms like we're having here in New York this
Yeah.
winter. But obviously, when they can be, it's super impactful.
Yeah.
What about for an importer or distributor when they are the ones that are presenting the wines to you? What can be really impactful in that scenario?
I think it depends on the book because some distributors have a really massive book. So it's sometimes it can be difficult for them to really know, deeply about everything. And then some are a little bit smaller and more intimate. But I think that the whole goal is sort of to not only just taste the wines, but talk about the story of the wine. And it's also not only about what we think, it's about what our guests will think. Because at the end of the day, we are, it is a business and we're trying to sell this product, but I think a lot of it is sort of just about that education and, soaking up as much as you can so that you can explain that to the guest and sort of translate that passion from, the distributor to me and then on to the guest.
Right. So having really clear communication information that helps you really position the wine
Yeah.
for the guest and for the customer. And your wine program right now, talk to us. I know you mentioned a pecorino
Yeah.
earlier as one of a fresh kind of style of wine that you're introducing right now and really enjoying. What are some other areas, would you say, of growth within your wine program for the Italian wine category specifically? Where have you been really adding on to the program for Italian wine?
Yeah, so I just took over the program maybe a month and a half ago. So I'm still sort of getting the ropes on ordering and everything, but definitely my plan is to expand the Italian wine program pretty significantly. I mean, right now, the heart of our menu is Burgundy, and I think that's going to stay because that's, especially in Midtown, Burgundy, Bordeaux, those, and, Napa
Yeah, the
Cabernet,
classics.
those will always be there. But I think Italian wine it's becoming more popular and people are appreciating it more and there's a lot more to explore. So, and again, the value I think for Italian wine is, minus some Barolos and Brunellos and et cetera. I think a lot of the indigenous grape varieties that are coming back and resurfacing offer really great value. Like I
Yeah.
just added a Timorasso the other day that's stunning. We have a new Verdicchio. We're just gonna keep tasting and keep deciding on what we should add, but definitely we'll see some progress on that front.
Amazing. Are you leaning more into like lighter styles? It sounds like you just mentioned a couple whites, but is that where you're seeing more opportunity on your program, especially maybe compared to some of those classic categories,
Yeah,
obviously red wines?
for sure. I mean, our cuisine is contemporary Asian cuisine, so you do see
Okay,
some spice and some things that can be hard to pair. So I find like fresh Italian aromatic white wines go really well, and there's a plethora of them. So I think the focus right now will be to get more of those, but a little bit of everything.
got it. What's one thing you're pairing right now with the pecorino from your menu?
Pecorino is great because it's full bodied and still has really great acidity. So you can kind of pair it with a lot of the menu, not only just like the crudo in the front, but it can actually keep going to some of the bigger dishes. So like our black cod clay pot, it's a little bit heartier, definitely more of an entree style, and that also goes really well. It's a really versatile wine.
Okay, so it could even be something you're selling by the bottle to take someone through, a full
Yeah.
meal. Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So, Jack, obviously, are very ambitious. Have been studying hard. What's next for you? I know you obviously looking towards the MW, but where do you see your career trajectory moving in the wine world?
I mean, MW is definitely what I want to do. I always want to come back to Italian wine. So, this MW journey, if I start it, which I plan on doing, minimum, I think it'll take me 5 years. So it's hard to say. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
probably stay in restaurants for a while longer, but I don't know if I see myself being in restaurants super long term.
Okay.
I think doing that MW journey will introduce me to a lot of people and hopefully will open some doors. So it's up in the air, and that's what's cool about where I am right now. Like I feel good about what I'm doing, and I'm happy, but I'm also happy to change things up. So
Yeah.
it's hard to say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's endless possibilities and opportunities, and you never know when a door might open, just the way it did for you by studying abroad in Rome, right, with
Yeah,
Italian wine. So, kind of never know when those opportunities might come about.
exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Jack, as we wind down, we'll do our rapid fire quiz that we do at the end of every episode. We'll ask you 4 questions. We've added a fourth. So if you can do your best to answer these in 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay.
Question number 1: what is your number 1 tip for mastering the US wine market?
I think the U.S. wine market can be really complicated, especially with the 3-tier system, especially for people that don't live here. And even for me, it's still really hard to wrap your head around sometimes. So I think focusing on that distribution, not just the wine, the U.S. market often runs on incentives and relationships.
Mhm.
So sort of navigating that can be difficult, but that is definitely a focus.
Understanding 3-tier. Yep, absolutely. And
Classic.
understanding it yourself, not only relying it on your importers and distributors.
Yeah.
Question number 2: what is something you might have told your younger professional self about working in the wine industry?
I think that try as much as you can. I think I've done a pretty good job so far. Like I've done one harvest, but I might want to revisit that. I would also tell myself not to just sell what you love, kind of learn how to position it, because great wine doesn't just move on like passion alone. It moves when you articulate that value and relevance, and especially on the floor.
Absolutely. And when you give the customer what they're asking for, right?
Yeah.
So that's great advice. What is one of your favorite travel hacks when you're traveling for wine and for wine work?
I know a lot of people do this, but I like to bring a bottle of wine to producer visits.
It's a new one. We haven't heard that one yet.
Really? Okay, cool. So yeah, what I like to do, and I've done it before, the first winery that I worked at in the Hudson Valley is called Whitecliff, and
Okay.
I'll bring a bottle of that to my winery visits just because it establishes a connection and I can kind of explain, why I'm giving it to them. It's also when you're traveling in Europe, they don't really have access to New York state wines, so I also think that's
Definitely
another
not.
bonus.
What kind of wine do you bring them? What kind of
It
wines are you
depends.
making there?
We've got Riesling and then Cab Franc. New York is, that Cab Franc forward, so shout out to them. But definitely, yeah, Cab Franc Riesling.
Amazing. Cab Franc and Riesling. Very cool. That's exciting. Yeah, and definitely they're not getting those wines in Italy. That's for sure.
No.
All right. And finally, what is your favorite wine bar in New York City right now?
I often go to Cork in Soho, but there's a couple of new ones like Lay Wine Bar, Stars, and then the classic, the Four Horsemen. That's,
Yeah,
standard.
all great ones. Awesome. Well, Jack, thank you again for joining us today on the podcast. How can our listeners connect with you, follow along, follow your journey in wine?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is just through my Instagram right now, which is just Jack _ Liggett, Liggett.
Amazing. All right, Jack, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you've enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.